Well, welcome to this afternoon's deeper dive, part of our Waterside chat series. I'm Tom Sadler, the network's deputy director and host for the Waterside chats. This afternoon, we're going to do the second half of a two-part look at using video for outreach and communications efforts. Joe Knight, the network's communications consultant and video producer, will be talking about how to use B-roll and how it can be used as a powerful storytelling tool. Welcome, Joe. Let's get started.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And very happy to be back for part two of our introduction to video shooting. As Tom mentioned, we have part one available on the Marine Fish Conservation Network's YouTube channel. So if you've not had a chance to check that out, feel free to do so. I will talk a little bit about what we covered there shortly. But just again, I'm Joe Knight. I'm the communications consultant for the Marine Fish Conservation Network, and I'm also a video producer. And I have been in communications, mostly for nonprofits, some broadcast clients for a number of years. So I'm going to share some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years and give you just a very basic introduction to video shooting to hopefully get you excited to start shooting on your own. So with that, as I mentioned, part one, we covered understanding why video is an important communications tool. If you're not using video as part of your communication strategy and advocacy outreach, you're missing a really big opportunity. So we went over that in part one. We gave you some basic steps for getting started. And this video series is geared toward people who don't have video equipment, who are not very experienced in video shooting. And so we wanted to give you some basic tips for getting started using a smartphone like your iPhone, which these days has a very, very capable camera to it. And lastly, in part one, we gave you some tips for recording video interviews. So essentially, if you're talking on camera yourself or recording somebody else, we gave you some tips for doing that. So in today's part two, we are going to talk about why you should record video B-roll, as Tom mentioned. And so what is B-roll? Essentially, it is a video jargon word for everything that is not part of the interview. So this is all your pretty footage that you shoot outside of someone talking directly on camera. And we went over this a little bit in part one, but just to kind of give you some background on what B-roll is, it is a leftover term from editing back in the analog days. So all of your video interviews would be on the A-roll. All of your other video footage would be on the B-roll, and you would edit both of those onto a C-roll. So for whatever reason, the A-roll and C-roll went away, but the term B-roll has stuck around. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. And we'll also give you some tips to make your video recording that much better, just to bump up the quality as you're getting started and getting used to shooting on your own. So just as a common frame of reference, I've put together some raw B-roll footage that I shot on the eastern shore of Maryland. This is an oyster farmer. It was for a video that was talking about water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. And it's about a minute, a little less than a minute and a half. We'll take a look. We'll discuss a little bit now, but it'll be a point of reference as we move forward. So let's go ahead and give it a look.
Farther south on two.
So is the one? It's like 3 bags small and 3 bags large.
Okay. I mean, since we're here, we're having now, right?
I guess the whole thing is do we wash it?
Great. So what did you see as part of that video footage? Did you get a sense of the place? Did you get a sense that we were on the Eastern Shore, on the Chesapeake Bay? Did you get an idea of the physical location where we were shooting this video? Did you see people's faces and expressions? Did you see a variety of different shots? What did that keep your interest? And what is it that you heard? Did you remember hearing the water dripping from the nets, the oyster shells shaking, the motor running? These are all of the things that contribute to a video experience. And this is all of the types of things we're going to be talking more about during this video session. But first, we want to talk about why record B-roll in the first place. And mostly, it makes your videos come to life. So if you have somebody talking on camera, they share a lot of interesting information. But what really makes videos compelling is seeing the visuals that go along with that. So anytime that you are recording footage for a video, it really helps to think through what are the visuals that are going to make that story come to life. If you also record video B-roll footage on the regular, you'll end up building a really large library that you can pull from for future video projects. So my hope is that you will get in the practice of bringing out your camera, practicing shooting some B-roll, getting video footage of whatever it is that you are working on in your issue area, and you'll end up with a wonderful library of video footage to pull from in the future for your own video projects. It also is an opportunity to have video for other people to use. And I'm thinking specifically for broadcast news. You may have a local station that wants to cover your issue, and more likely than not, they will immediately ask you if you have B-roll available for them to use. And if you have a wonderful archive of B-roll footage, you'll be able to offer them that footage, which not only gives you a leg up of them telling your story and actually covering your issue, but it makes the story that they tell that much more compelling. So hopefully you're on board with shooting some B-roll. As I mentioned, if you're just looking to get started and how to use your camera, you can visit part 1. But assuming you are on board with shooting, have a basic idea of how to use your iPhone or other smartphone for shooting, now I want to give you a few tips for thinking like a videographer and shooting great B-roll. So first of all, you want to think about how the footage can support your message and your story. This is a communication and outreach tool. Video is. It is something that you should be incorporating into your outreach and communication strategy. So anytime that you think about shooting footage, you want to really think about in the lens of how can this support the story I'm trying to tell. So for example, the oyster farmer that we went to visit in the B-roll that we saw, the video that we were shooting that for was about a dam on one of the rivers that feeds into the Chesapeake Bay. And the story was about water quality when that water gets released from the dam and how it impacts businesses further down in the Chesapeake Bay. So one of the things we wanted to do with the video is talk to an oyster farmer whose business is directly impacted by water quality. So that's why it was important for us to actually follow along with that oyster farmer on his boat, checking the traps, seeing the oysters that were produced, and all of these elements can really help create that story that you're trying to tell in video.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Before you may be covering this a little bit further down the line, but I wonder if when you're setting that expectation of doing B-roll for an issue, do you prepare a shot list?
Yes, we do. That is a great question. And we'll cover this a little bit, but excellent question. So essentially, anytime you think about producing a video, again, you want to think about all the elements that will help you tell that story. And creating a shot list helps you keep track of everything that you will need to shoot in order to tell that story. There are different things that we'll think about, and I'll get more into that later on in terms of thinking about what it is that you need to cover. But for instance, since we just saw the footage of the oyster farmer in Maryland, that was only a minute and a half of footage. I shot a whole lot of other footage in addition to that. And from that just B-roll footage alone, I could edit together a visual story that could tell the story without even any narration. But in order to do that, you need to make sure you've got every visual piece of the puzzle so that your viewer can follow along with you. So for instance, it wasn't a complete story, but you did get a sense that he went out in the boat, he checked the traps, he emptied the traps, he loaded the traps onto the dock, he emptied them and washed them. So you can see those different elements, and creating a shot list is a great way to make sure that you've got all of those different elements together before you go out to shoot. So great question.
I don't want to go down too far in the weeds, but it occurs to me, maybe, and so what do you think is that in an earlier slide, you asked the question, what did we see? And then you articulated the things that we should have been looking for. And I'm thinking that maybe your shot list is, here are some basic questions to ask, and then so you cover those, what I gather are the sort of the more important points of getting, or the more important aspects of getting the B-roll so that it's usable in the future.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things we're going to cover a little bit later in this presentation, is essentially how to think like a videographer. So you're capturing all of those pieces so that at the end of the day, when you go into edit, you will have them available to you. So it's a great question. So essentially my second point here of thinking from a communication standpoint is what we were just discussing, is really letting the visuals tell much of your story. Video is such a visceral, just wonderful medium that excels beyond somebody talking to you on camera. So as many visuals as you can get to tell that story, the better off you will be. And as an editor myself, like, you can never have too much B-roll, never. If you can shoot as much as you can, that just gives you so many more options in edit. So we'll go over more things to think about as you're creating that shot list as we go along. So one of the things, again, thinking sort of as a videographer, when you're coming to a new situation, look at whatever it is you're shooting with fresh eyes. I think this is one of the barriers that people have to not recording video footage, is that they're not looking at whatever it is they're doing as all that interesting. For instance, the oyster farmer, that is a typical day at his office. I'm sure by now he's bored of, it's nothing new. There was nothing exciting to him because he's going out on the water day in, day out. For someone new, and for me following along on his day, it was incredibly interesting. So if you can look at the experience with fresh eyes and think about how would somebody else look at this and what would be the interesting elements to pull out, that's a great way to even start to begin to look at what it is that you are recording on video. So again, simple everyday experiences can be compelling, even if you think they might not be. So again, going back to like the shot list, one of the things you want to do is set the stage and give a sense of place. That is one thing to keep in mind. And what I'm talking about here is giving an idea of where you are to the viewer. So, very few people do not or enjoy not knowing where they are. And that is the same with video. So it can be creating wide shots, which we'll talk about in a bit, to give a sense of the actual location, and also recording little close-ups of details that really center somebody into the details that give the place uniqueness and a sense of something special. So think about where you are, not only what you're shooting, but the surrounding things around you, and make sure you can record shots of that. So this is the big one, grab the viewer's attention, right? I mean, this is essentially all of social media is basically grabbing your attention in small little snippets and getting you to watch a video. So the same thing, if you're a videographer, you want to be looking for those moments that grab someone's attention. So by this, we're talking about something that's visually interesting, something that's emotionally compelling, something that's surprising or unexpected. This is one of those things that I think people intuitively have a good sense for, if for no other reason that they watch a lot of social media. So really looking for those moments that grab someone's attention are things you also want to shoot. This next one, in terms of grabbing people's attention, wanting to find the action, which seems intuitive, I realize, but as someone who sets up video shoots, I can't tell you the number of times people have suggested that we come in and record a conference or someone speaking or a PowerPoint presentation. And all of these things might have really great information to use and incorporate into the video. But if you're thinking about something compelling, you want action. You want to think about physically what people are doing. And that's where you want to focus most of your attention in terms of creating your shot list and shooting B-roll. So action is interesting, but people are also interesting. So anytime you have an action, you always want to also record someone's reactions or expressions. In the B-roll of the oyster farmer, I got a little bit of that. He at that moment was not being super expressive, but just making sure that you're not only recording what people are doing, but getting close-ups of their face and their reactions so that you can connect to your viewer on that emotional level. Excuse me. So this is something I also covered in part 1. And again, this is why I wanted to show you the B-roll from before. Audio is as important as the visual elements to your story. So hopefully one of the things you noticed were all the audio and the sounds that were occurring while we were watching that B-roll. This is something we went more in depth into in part 1, but always make sure to have the microphone as close as possible to capture all of that sound. If you're having trouble with sound, you can always record on a separate smartphone or separate iPhone. You can stick that iPhone close to your subject and hit the voice recorder and record audio, and then you can merge it later and edit. That's a little next level, but just to emphasize, as much as you can think about the audio elements, then that will set you well. It's also the audio elements that are important to your storytelling, right? So I'm thinking about going out on a fishing vessel, and when you're thinking about your shot list, as Tom was talking about, thinking through like the different elements, like the horns, boat horns that you hear, the seagulls, the sounds of fishing nets that are coming up. These really are what make your videos come to life, and making sure you're recording those audio elements specifically and putting that as part of your shot list is also helpful. So this is one of those intuitive things, and partly why I'm hitting home the idea of audio being as important as the visual elements, is that it's basically how your brain works. Like if you see something, you want to hear it. And if you hear something, you really want to see it. So as much as you can think about merging those two things in your video recording, the better your video would be. So for instance, going back to the oyster farmer from Maryland, pulling those nets up and seeing and hearing that water dripping from the nets into the river was something that was very prominent in the footage. But if I had not actually recorded the dripping of the water from the nets into the water, something would have just been a little bit off in your mind. You would want to know where that sound is coming from. So essentially, if you hear something, record the visual. And if you record the visual, make sure you record the audio. Just make sure those two things are married. Likewise, if you're doing an interview and someone talks specifically about something in your issue area, make sure you go back and have the visuals to accompany that. So that would be another thing you would want to add to your shot list. So for example, with the oyster farmer, we did do an interview with him, and he spoke about how the water quality was important for creating the big, healthy oysters. And that is one of the things we specifically put on our shot list, so that when he was talking about healthy, large oysters that are created from his farms, we had those visuals to go along with it. So anytime you are doing an interview or recording your own, make yourself a note when it's done. What are the things that we talked about? Can I go get some visuals about that? And if so, add it to your shot list. So just a couple of things from a technical side. Again, we went over a lot of this in part one, but just when you're starting to think about B-roll from just a strictly technical point of view, you essentially want to first wipe off that lens. Most of you are going to be pulling out a smartphone that's got finger smudges all over it. It's a simple step and one that's rarely so few people do. So please wipe off that lens. And if you are shooting anything other than strictly for social media, which has Instagram and TikTok, they have a vertical orientation. You want to keep the camera horizontal, similar to the picture on the left. This will allow you to use the footage on YouTube, on your website, and it gives you more options for sharing that video footage with others, as I mentioned before, for instance, the local news station. This one, hold each shot for a minimum of 10 seconds. That also seems like a no-brainer thing to mention, but 10 seconds when you're shooting actually seems like forever. And most people go on to the next shot very quickly. And when you're in edit, you're going to be kicking yourself. So literally count to 10 in your brain as you're holding each shot, and then make sure you get to at least 10 before you move on to the next shot. Focus is one of the things, as mentioned in part one, you really can't fix out of focus in edit. There are a lot of things that you can fix in edit. This is not one of them. So as anything that you want the viewer to pay attention to, you want to make sure that is in focus. If you need to double or triple check, that's great. Keep the footage steady as much as possible. It's hard to hold a camera like this and keep it steady. There are a lot of options on the market, cheap ones even, for little mini tripods and things to steady your camera. You can use those. I went over in part one stuff that I use from my pantry to use a makeshift tripod. So if you're just a little teaser there, if you're interested in checking that out, you can do so. But as much as you can, keep your footage steady. It's not always possible. I actually, the footage of the oyster farmer from Maryland, the shot that I stuck in there of his face, it was actually a little shaky, and I left that in. I did get better shots later, but I left that one in just to show, A, that it's a very difficult thing to do, even if you have the right equipment on something like a boat. But also just, it's one of those things that we really want to emphasize, that perfection is not what we're going for. Do your best effort to keep something steady, but having that authentic experience that you record and share with others trumps that far beyond anything that is not quite as perfect from a video standpoint. A few other basics. Again, most of this we covered in part one, but just make sure it's well lit. That means making sure the light source is in front of whatever it is you're shooting as much as possible. You obviously can't control the sun, but as much as you can control the lighting and turn whatever it is you are focusing on toward a good light source, that will improve the quality of your footage. And the last thing I wanted to cover, this is less on the technical side, but just one thing from a shooting B-roll standpoint. A lot of times when you are shooting B-roll, you may be recording people that you don't know. So obviously, the folks you do know, you've talked to them ahead of time. For folks you don't know, it is still important to ask permission. There are a lot of rules about who you can shoot, where you can shoot, things like that, without permission. Most of them follow common sense. For instance, you can't walk onto someone's private property and start shooting, right? Or federal state parks, a lot of times you need special permission to shoot there. Public spaces is usually fair game, but my general rule, if I'm going to record somebody and they are the main subject of what I'm recording, I will go ahead and ask permission. And if you want to take it one step further, it's great to get them agreeing or giving you permission on camera. You can actually just record them saying that they are giving you permission to record them. That will make all of your organizational lawyers very happy. I especially want to emphasize this with kids. This is very tricky. Do not ever record kids without express permission from their parents or guardians. That's where all the rules, basically that is kind of the biggest rule about permission, that if you have one takeaway from this, it is be careful with kids. All right, so that was like the technical side a little bit. Now I want to give you just a couple of things to keep in mind to elevate the quality of your B-roll. And this is essentially just few little tips and tricks to keep in mind. Actually, I should stop there. Tom, is there any, before we go into this, I just realized that would be a great place to see if there was any questions that you had or thoughts.
Sorry, you caught me.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. So the interesting thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the hook.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, okay, so I mean, the hook, notwithstanding it, it's a great pun for the Marine Fish Conservation Network.
Exactly.
But in the now modern internet age, social media age, the hook is really the meme, right? If you think about, okay, what's my hook? What if you had that situation? What would you turn into a meme, or what would you look for a meme? Well, that just kind of entered into my.
Yeah, it's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, but in this day and age, if you're not a newsie, not a journalist, you'd like the hook. What are you talking about? I get it. Well, you guys are fishermen, but help me. So another way to think about that is the meme. And well, there was something else. It was on the techno, like trying to keep stuff steady. The only thing that clearly it's important, but and I was thinking about this when you were talking about being on a boat, right? I mean, if it's steady, it's almost like it's overproduced, whereas if it's you get that authenticity. And I think about, like, when I shoot video for watching students fly fishing, I'm not trying to get a perfect steady cam view of their cast. I want them to see what they're doing wrong or where they could improve. And I think I think that was a good point to say, look, you don't need to get that camera dead still, especially if you're in a situation where, like, you're walking or you're on a boat or on a river. I thought that was an important point too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, again, I think that you and I are really wanting to hit home the message of this. This series is for people who are just getting started, and thinking about perfection is not even worth thinking about. It's like we want people to get engaged, get excited.
Couldn't agree more.
What's that?
I said I couldn't agree more. Do
Yeah,
not let
absolutely.
perfection be the enemy of the good. Do not
Exactly.
let perfection keep you from producing a product to get out there. I think we
Right.
talked about this in the first episode about, we started a podcast over a year ago, and it's a lot different, not podcast, but the Waterside chats. It's they've improved, or at least I think they've improved
I will
from
agree.
where they started. And if we had waited until we had a studio and all the stuff that we needed, we never would have done it. And now I think we're doing a pretty darn good job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, this hopefully, and hopefully this is the takeaway people are getting, is that these are things to keep in mind, but um, not barriers to progress, so to
And then the
speak.
last thing in that vein, things to keep in mind, I will echo what you said about get permission, just in terms of when you're shooting something and you've got people wandering around, or even, if you look at a building or a scene and say, you know, think in terms of not only common sense but common courtesy. If somebody were going to take a picture of that and you owned it, would you want somebody to ask you, "Hey, is it all right?" And then absolutely reinforce the same thing you said about kids. That's just like, wow. If you do not have permission, and I would, getting it on camera at the very least, I'd want to get written permission. Um, just you don't want to do it, especially in this day and age. It's just, ask don't take that shot if there's a kid in it and you can't get permission in writing or at least on camera.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, that's all I got.
Great. So yeah, so now I'm just thinking again, there are a lot of ways you can elevate the quality of your video. My goal is just to give you pretty much sort of two things to keep in mind when you're thinking about shooting. One of them, well, both have to do with composition, but one of them is just to make the image look a little more artistic and beautiful. And it's an easy one, which is why I'm including. So essentially, a lot of people have heard of the rule of thirds, but the idea is, in still photography and video, that you want your subject or your main action to be in 1/3 of the frame. So this is some stock footage that I just found, and it perfectly exemplifies this. Essentially, you can see that the action and the point of the focal point for your eye is happening in the bottom left of the image, right where the intersection of 1/3 of the frame horizontally and 1/3 of the frame vertically intersect. And then over on the right, you've got the lure coming up on the right third of the frame. So this is just something to keep in mind as you're framing how you want to shoot something. It's something that very easy that you can do and think about that will take your video up just to a higher quality level. And the second composition thing I want to go over is shot variety. And this goes back also to the shot list that we were talking about earlier, Tom. Shot variety essentially allows you a bunch of options in edit that you may not necessarily realize you need until you sit down to start editing. So I have my own ways of thinking about how I create enough shots so that I have a good variety to edit with. I want to focus on 3 types of shots that you can think about. And literally, you can write it as part of your shot list to get one of each at least as you're shooting. But I put together more video footage. We'll talk about it more afterwards, but I just want to show this as a frame of reference. This is a dairy farm also in Maryland, up in Frederick, Maryland. And it's mostly cows, but you will see one shot of the farmer. So essentially these first 2 shots are the wide shots and also what we call establishing shots. This series, these are all what I would call medium shots. You've got a variety of different characters. The characters in this being cows. And there you have our farmer. And these are examples of close-ups. It's like 1 to 2 cows there. We've got some good detail shots. I added an extreme close-up because why not? And the last things we will talk about in after this is just some very easy movements. This is a pan. It's essentially when you stay stationary and you move the camera from left to right. And this is another shot. It's more of a dolly shot, but I'm physically moving with the camera. So, you know, these last movement shots, basically once you're comfortable with the first 3 shots, these are some extra elements you can just play around with, because movement always creates some visual interest. So just to go back over what we just saw, essentially if you have a wide shot, a medium shot, and a close-up, and anything that I shoot, I make sure I have at least one of each of those shots, hopefully multiple shots of each of those. But if you can keep that in mind, you will give yourself a lot of variety in the edit room. So just as a matter of fact, and again, you can write it down into your shot list, these 3 shots. So the first one is the wide shot or the establishing shot. And the way to think about this is that you're giving that sense of place, right? So you're giving the wide shot, you're establishing where you are. The focus is really on the environment, not your subject, but where they are physically. The medium shot focuses on the character's interaction with the surrounding environment. So as you were looking at the medium shots, you could see that the cows were in the barn. You could see the farmer interacting with the cow. You could still get a sense of the environment around you, but you're really focusing on the characters or the subjects. And the last is the close-up. Here you're really focusing on the subject itself. The surrounding environment is not as important, but this is a great way to show your character or your to grab those emotion shots. It's also a good option for showing details that really make the video just have those few extra elements that really ground people in where they are and show the interesting details. For instance, you know, with the Maryland oyster farmer, details like, you know, herons or egrets or flags flying on piers or whatever it is that kind of really ground you in that sense of place. You can get close-ups of those details to add in to create some visual element. So again, think about these 3 shots anytime you are shooting. Add them to part of your shot list, and you'll really thank yourself in the edit room. And the last that I mentioned was just a simple pan or movement. It adds visual interest. So once you're kind of used to getting your wide shot, your medium shot, and your close-up, you can start playing with some movement. I mean, just have fun. It's a great creative medium, and there's just, I mean, obviously videographers who are professional, there's a whole number of different camera angles and shots to include, but you know, it's just a fun way to let your creativity just really shine, I think. So that's another thing, you know, you can add that also into a shot list if you'd like. Add some movement, get some movement with that. Obviously, a lot of the times the subject that you're shooting has a lot of movement in and of itself. And so which case, you know, having a static shot is just fine and really visually interesting. But again, it's a great opportunity to play. And so this, I'll end on a bit of inspiration. Tom's smiling because he knows I was going to include this, but this is actually something I wanted to show as part of this presentation because it keeps with our fishing theme. But for copyright issues, it was not a smart idea to do. So I saw a river runs through it in the theater. I'm dating myself. But the scene that I'm showing you with that you can Google after this for a moment of inspiration is essentially the Brad Pitt character. He's catching a fish and he gets swept away by the river as he's in pursuit of this fish while he's fly fishing. And essentially, if you want a North Star for everything we've talked about, it's a great watch. They've got just that lone clip on YouTube if you want to check it out. But it has the variety of shots that we've been talking about. It has the expressions that we want to capture. It's got the sense of place with the mountains and the river. It's got all the audio elements to it, like the rushing of the river and the reeling in of the line. It's got the look of determination on Brad Pitt's face, but it also has the reactions from the father and his brother on the shore. So it just kind of captures everything it is that we've talked about. So this scene has long been a sense of inspiration for me, and so I just wanted to share it as a fun way to get inspired yourself to start video shooting. Obviously, this person who shot this was, far beyond our levels and had a lot more equipment that you will ever have. But it is truly an inspiring clip. So, and it's a very fun watch. So, with that, any other thoughts or questions, Tom? I don't know if anyone who's joined us had any questions in the chat.
There's no one in the chat, but in that I certainly agree with you about that scene from A River Runs Through It. What's interesting, and I can't remember the guy's name, and I was looking up on my bookshelf to see if I can put my hand on the book real quickly. There were two very interesting scenes in that movie. That was one of them, and the guy who was the body double for Brad Pitt in that scene almost drowned. And they had to shoot the scene 3 or 4 different times. And so that was one of the other interesting thing. And then I think the best scene from that movie is a scene that they almost didn't put in, which is at the end. And I can relate to this because I'm now an old man, but the scene at the end where they're reading the last passages from the book is an older guy who is tying a fly on, and his hands are shaking, and it's very evocative. And if you want to talk about close-up and extreme close-up, that's a terrific scene. And what was interesting was that they had looked for different people to use to illustrate that scene, and the guy who was putting all the shots together for Bob Redford to look at said nah, and Redford had not said yes to any of them, and he goes, well, I got one more, I'm almost hesitant to show it to you. And when he ran it, Redford said, that's the one I want. That is exactly the one I want. So there's the backstory to that movie is really interesting. So
yeah, I'm
that's
sure.
some tidbits.
Yeah, and the thing I love also is that I feel like there's more than that clip that I highlighted for sure, but I think there's more places in that movie that really shows storytelling without narration.
Yep.
And that is the power of B-roll. Really well shot video footage can tell your story even without narration. And it's a great example to look at that demonstrates this, and to like that is the perfection degree. But
yeah, I mean, it shows why Redford's a better director than he is an actor.
I'm not going to go there. Anyway, well, that is hopefully gives you some tips for getting started, some helpful things to think about as you're creating shot lists, as you're thinking about how to approach something that you are going to do some video recording of. And mostly, I just hope it gives you a sense of an idea that this is something very achievable for you and something that would be really fun to start doing and also important. I mean, it is, that is something that we did talk a little bit more, spend a little more time in part one, but really incorporating video as part of your communication strategy is really, I think, becoming increasingly important and increasingly impactful as social media becomes, more dominant in our world. So hopefully, if you've watched this video and come away with an idea that it would be both advantageous and fun to start video recording and try it out, then I would say I would feel really good about that. So,
Well, Joe,
yeah,
you've done a terrific job on both of these sessions, and I really appreciate it. I
thank
think
you.
you're absolutely right that that it's not a scary thing to do, and we've you've given us at least the foundational tools to get started, and I just want to thank you for it.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. And I have my email address up. If anybody has questions after watching this, feel free to reach out.
And for the listeners, it's Blue Green, BLUEGREEN Joe, Blue Green Joe, JO at Gmail. Easy enough to remember.
Great. No, it was a lot of fun and happy videoing.
Well, thank you.